Roughly a month ago, our own Dane from Dane Reads rated A Midsummer Night's Dream 3 stars on Goodreads. 3 stars is a solid, positive rating, but it was his review that caught my eye. In it, he mentioned that he wouldn't pay to go see the play performed, as he didn't find it funny, and as one of the scholars in the critical essays of his edition had said it was, quote, the worst possible Shakespeare play to see live. This assessment puzzled me, not because of my own love for the play, but because of the first chapter in a book called The Shakespeare Wars by Ron Rosenbaum. The impetus behind Rosenbaum's book, published in 2006, was the experience he had seeing a Royal Shakespeare Company production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by Peter Brook, some 36 years earlier. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Brook's sensitivity to, feeling for, and staging of A Midsummer Night's Dream changed Rosenbaum's life. When one reads about how the production altered his sense of his relationship to literature, and how the production revealed to him that a visionary staging can open Shakespeare's text like a work of origami, one gets the sense that seeing it was profound and formative for him on the level of an honest-to-God religious experience. So in addition to rereading the play this week, I sat down this morning and reread the first 30 pages or so of Rosenbaum's book, that my notes might somehow fall into conversation with his notes. In a nutshell, Rosenbaum writes of how the lover's lines and couplets in the play, which he'd never warmed to before seeing the Brook production, seemed to emerge from the mouths of the actors as though the lines never existed before being uttered in that instant, as though they were the expressions of the actual lived experiences of those actors in those moments, as though the frenzied passion of the actors were itself the source, like a spring of water, of the language, rather than the lines memorized having provided the actors with motivations and directions. And it is important to remember that it's the play's language itself, when all is said and done, that allows for the possibility of such alignment between expression and purpose that paves the way for Shakespeare the writer to himself disappear. Rosenbaum also writes about what he perceives to be the bottomlessness of the play's meaning, about how the subject of the play, the straddling of borders between the natural and the supernatural, being adored and being spurned, the degree to which it both arises from a sense of wonder and inspires a sense of wonder, and the ways in which it constructs layers of meaning lead us onto the slope of a spiraling inquiry that we would be foolish not to indulge and explore. I'll here read you an excerpt from the book, to do with even just the name of bottom. And as my reporting came full circle, as I found myself focusing on scholarly disputations in the academic world I'd fled, I kept finding more to report on in Shakespeare, deeper levels to the bottomlessness Bottom speaks of. As I was writing this section, for instance, I had occasion to consult the Oxford single-volume edition of The Dream, the one edited by Peter Holland, then director of the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford, now at Notre Dame. And I found there, appended to that passage, the one in which Bottom tries to expound his dream, a remarkable footnote. In fact, in a lifetime of searching and finding unexpected revelations in footnotes, it's one of the most remarkable I've come upon. It's a footnote on the source of Bottom's name. For centuries, it has been supposed that, while it may have been a fruitful source of bawdy puns, the name Bottom, as in Bottom the Weaver, had a more prosaic than profane origin. In his craft, a bottom was the name given to the large spool at the base of a hand loom that spun out the thread to be woven. While that in itself has a lovely resonance for the weaver of plays who spun out the name, the footnote suggests there may be an even more provocative and resonant source of the name Bottom. Peter Holland's footnote begins by tracing the source of Bottom's lines. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, to 1 Corinthians in the New Testament, where the line runs more logically, The eye hath not seen, and the ear hath not heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. Bottom's line, then, does more than just comically invert the eye-ear language of Corinthians. It refers to a passage that speaks of an unimaginable, literally inconceivable experience, the experience of, quote, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him, the experience of ecstatic communion with the divine. Other scholars have noted the origins of Bottom's language about eye and ear in those lines in Corinthians, but the remarkable disclosure in Peter Holland's footnote comes when he takes us just a little bit further into the New Testament passage than the language about eye and ear that Bottom transposes. Holland carefully prepares the ground for this by examining the versions of that passage in Corinthians that would have been available to Shakespeare when he wrote A Midsummer Night's Dream, sometime around 1595, 2 decades before the King James Bible appeared. In the 1568 Bishop's Bible, the line about the heart of man not yet realizing the things which God hath prepared for them that love him is followed by these words, For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. But, and here's the revelation, in the 1557 Geneva Bible, the one more likely to have been the Shakespeare family Bible, since he was born in 1564, before the publication of the Bishop's Bible, and the one he paraphrases elsewhere, that last phrase about the deep things of God is translated as, For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the bottom of God's secrets. So in one fell swoop, with the naming of a character, here is Shakespeare making a broad comic joke, referencing the tools of a character's profession and winking to his working-class audiences, using that reference as a metaphor for what he, as a writer, is doing in the spinning of narrative fabric, and alluding to the complications innate in man with the limitations of his senses, looking to comprehend the gifts of God, including, of course, the ability to adore and the good fortune to be adored. If the naming of a character can achieve such depth of meaning, we might look elsewhere at the text to see how it interrogates and unveils human experience. Rereading A Midsummer Night's Dream this week, I was most struck by its appreciation of liminal spaces, of the pivoting that can occur in life when certainties blur, when fixed realities dissolve and allow for change. We see it in the title, the word midsummer. That night when the subjects of folklore more easily intrude on the world that disseminates folklore, when the curtain between the real and the fanciful becomes less opaque. And we see it in Titania, discussing the seasons, quote, And thorough this distemperature we see, the seasons alter, hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose, and on old Hyam's thin and icy crown, an odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds is, as in mockery, set. The spring, the summer, the childing autumn, angry winter, change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world, by their increase, now knows not which is which. And there is the question of to what extent an actor becomes the character he is playing. Bottom, in rehearsing the play of Pyramus and Thisbe, speculates that it might behoove him to step out of character on stage in order to reassure the audience that he is not actually dead. Seasons unwilling to allow people the comfort of certainty, those of us in the American West know all too well how disconcerting it can be to see snow in June. The very modern notion of having actors playing characters, playing actors playing characters, toying with the idea of revealing themselves as actors in the midst of playing characters. The fog upon waking from a dream, of not quite knowing if one is indeed awake. These intersectional spaces are the spaces in which love, the most profound and important aspect to life, the thing that is, for the religious person, God manifest in lived experience, appears and takes root. nowhere else and at no other time. To love is to make the leap, like electrical current across a gap, from not loving. And this is one of the many things this play is about. How we define ourselves in accordance with the tension between how we adore and are adored, just as seasons define themselves as much by what they're not as by what they are, and the verisimilitude of performance by an actor negotiating who he is in relation to who he is playing. When the frustrated, thwarted Hermia asks, "Am I not Hermia? Are you not Lysander?" It seems, and on some level is, a rhetorical question, but it's a serious interrogation, too, into the nature of identity. If one is inexplicably no longer loved by one's beloved, is she the same person? To what extent are we defined by how faithfully we are loved and how faithfully we love? So yes, ostensibly the play is silly, whimsical fun, and I find it very funny indeed. The teasing about Hermia's height has me in stitches every time I read it. But it is nothing like a trifle. If you've ever wondered whether you might be missing something profound and complex in A Midsummer Night's Dream, read it again, and again, and again, for Rosenbaum is correct. It is bottomless. Hey, bud. Come here now, guy. Oh. Hello. Hello, little mister.